Good afternoon. My name is Oliver Judd and welcome to the Security of Payment webinar. I'll be your facilitator for today's presentation. Throughout the course of the webinar you may wish to ask a question. This can be done by typing a question in the space provided in the Questions tab. Please note that this webinar will be recorded and made available on the NECA YouTube page for later use and reference. Finally, I'd like to thank you for taking part in today's webinar, and on that note I'll hand over to today's presenter, Stafford Poyser.
Good afternoon, folk. Today our discussion, as you know, is about the amendments to the Building and Construction Industry Security of Payments Act. The Building and Construction Industry Security of Payments Act 1999 regulates payment practices in the industry. The Act's objective is to promote the flow of progress payments and provide a way to quickly and fairly resolve disputes about payments. The Act was amended by the New South Wales Parliament in November 2013 by the Building and Construction Industry Security of Payments Act, Amendments Bill 2013, the bill, and the new laws come into operation on 21 April 2014. That's a key date to remember. Why the changes? The Collins Independent Inquiry into the Construction Industry Insolvency was established to report on causes and extent of insolvency into the construction industry and to make recommendations to better protect the interest of subcontractors in the industry. The New South Wales Government has passed new legislation for the purpose of introducing prompt or maximum payment terms for progress payments, requiring that payment claims made by a head contractor include a supporting statement declaring that all subcontractors have been paid what is due and payable, and removing the requirement that a payment claim must state that it is being made under the Act. Now, the reason for the Collins inquiry, if you know, over the past couple of years, things have been quite tough in the industry, and as you can see, over the 3 financial years to 2011-2012, insolvency in the New South Wales construction industry, and I emphasize that the New South Wales construction industry have accounted for at least 50% of insolvencies across all states and territories. Over the past 2 financial years, that's from the time of the second reading of the bill, more than 1,000 construction companies have entered into administration in New South Wales. So that obviously affects a lot of us and a lot of our members, and that's one of the reasons why the Collins inquiry came about, to make these recommendations. Now, as a result of the legislation, it appears that the legislation has created a 2-tier system regarding contract administration. Now, contracts entered into before 21 April 2014, the amendments do not apply to those. Contracts entered in from 21 April 2014, the amendments apply to those contracts. So it creates a bit of a tricky situation, and the legislation hasn't been that clear. That's the effect of our reading of the legislation at this stage, unless they change something or there's some notice that comes out and advises otherwise. The 2-tier system may create difficulties with your billing system. For example, if you put in the words payment claim underneath your invoices for the one system but not the other, that creates difficulties. But if you need any explanation or assistance, how to set up your systems or advising on what wording should be there, just contact us and we can assist there. What are the changes? The main changes are the payment terms, 15 business days and 30 business days. The magic words are no longer needed on payment claims. Head contractors must submit a supporting statement when serving a payment claim on a principal. Powers are given to authorities to call on documents and investigate false supporting statements issued by the head contractors. New trust account requirements for retention monies may be regulated. Now the payment terms, Section 11 of the Act which deals with payment terms has changed, and there have been a number of amendments to that Act. You can notice now 11.1c. Progress payments from principals to head contractors become due and payable 15 business days after payment claim is made. And progress payments from head contractors to subcontractors become due and payable on the date occurring 30 business days after payment claim is made. Now, one of the interesting features about the amendments, and I don't know whether it's a question of bad drafting or whether it is a question of intentionally done, the Collins report recommended that instead of business days, that the Act be changed to days, to normal calendar days. That hasn't been pushed through, so the recommendation was 15 days and 30 days, not business days. And also the provision of Section 11.1 of the Act has been deleted. Now, Section 11.1 deals with the default provision where the contract does not provide for a payment term. Then the default provision was 10 business days. That provision has been deleted from the Act. So where there's no payment terms agreed under the old system, it was 10, so 2 weeks, which is 10 business days, 2 weeks, which a subby could claim. We could issue, the payment should be due under the old Act. Now, for the default provision, it's now 6 weeks with a 30 business day requirement. So that's a bit prejudicial from that perspective. For a head contractor, it was 2 weeks, which is 10 business days. It's now been pushed up to 3 weeks. And obviously you have a knock-on effect when it comes to issuing notices of suspension, etc. Under the Act. So that hasn't really been well thought out, or it's changed quite a bit. Now, the magic words are no longer needed on certain payment claims. Section 13.2c of the Act provides that payment claims no longer have to include the statement, "This is a payment claim made under the Building and Construction Industry Security of Payments Act 1999, NSW, in order to attract the operation of the Act." There are exceptions which relate to an exempt residential building contract, and that's where works are carried out directly with the owner. And now we would say that those would only apply to contracts entered into after the 21st of April, and still be necessary to put on contracts entered in before that date. This requirement has been removed, as I stated. Many subcontractors were reluctant to use the Act's provisions for fear of losing future work, and this amendment addresses that. Accordingly, after this legislation is passed as law, treat service of an invoice served on you as service of a payment claim under the Security of Payments legislation, and serve a payment schedule in response. If you make a payment claim, however, note that you'll still need to comply with the remaining requirements under Section 13.2, which are to identify the construction work to which the payment claim relates and indicate the amount due and payable. Section 13.2c of the Act deals with reference dates. There are no changes to the way to make a payment claim, and very importantly, you note you may only make one claim under the Act for each reference date. The reference date is either the date stated in the contract for making claims, or if there's no date, it is the last day of each month. Advantages: this will allow you to serve a payment claim under the Act on the head contractor, and the head contractor cannot take you to task for doing so. Numerous examples from members when they serve payment claims under the Act on head contractors, they always get some kind of comeback from the head contractors, and sometimes they're upset that you dare to serve a payment claim on them. So that's out the window now after this amendment. You can ambush an uninformed contractor with a payment claim without them responding. So you may serve an invoice on them and they won't realize it's a payment claim, and therefore you'll be able to continue the process without them putting on a defense, which gives you a better chance of succeeding at the end of the claim. The party serving a payment schedule in response is more likely to put in a realistic scheduled amount instead of the usual null schedule when a payment schedule was served in the past. So in the past, when you put a payment claim under which has the words endorsed on it, the tendency is to put a zero balance on. When users serve the invoice, they generally put a more realistic figure on. That may change that aspect. Disadvantages: you can only send one invoice per month, otherwise sending more will invalidate the payment claim. Your accounts department need to be aware of this. So it's very important for future claims that you only issue invoices once a month. And if you have a whole series of invoices to issue, put them all together in a bundle and have a covering document summarizing all of the claim amount on the cover. And we can assist you with that if you need any help putting that together and giving you templates or providing you assistance on how to best do that. Most accounting systems do not provide for a two-tier system, that is issuing invoices, payment claims with and without the magic words on it. If your system cannot be changed, continue to put the magic words on all invoices until your contracts entered into before 21 April 2014 have been finalized and paid. Another disadvantage is that it's going to create uncertainty with adjudicators as to whether valid payment claims have been served or not. And obviously that in turn leads to increased appeals and litigation, which is not good for you as a contractor and regarding issuing of payment claims and the process of collecting your monies. Supporting statements, those are amendments to section 13.7 to 13.9 of the Act. Head contractors must submit supporting statements with their payment claims, indicating that it relates to a payment claim and includes a declaration that all subcontractors and suppliers have been paid amounts owing to them. Failure to attach same may attract a penalty of $22,000. If a head contractor serves a payment claim on the principal accompanied by a supporting statement, knowing it to be false or misleading, it may attract a penalty of $22,000 and or 3 months imprisonment. This reform will only come into effect when the regulations are made. It's not yet into effect, and it doesn't come into effect on the 21st of April. 21st of April was the due date for this coming into effect. However, the government has not released any regulations that we know of as yet. Now, frequently asked questions: who signs, declares that subcontractors have been paid, what is due and payable? The head contractor or director of the company or other officer of the organization authorized to make a declaration. What subcontractor payments are to be included in the supporting statement? You must include all payments due and payable at the time you submit a claim for payment to the principal. Are amounts in dispute considered due and payable? That's quite an important question. We often get inquiries from members that say, well, he owes me X amount, did he sign this declaration? So no, the answer is no. However, in the supporting statement, you must refer to any subcontractors for which an amount otherwise due and payable is still in dispute. So it should at least be recorded there. Powers given to authorities. That's section 36 to 36B. The proposed provisions state that appointed authorized officers, public service employees, may require a head contractor or associated person to provide information or documents relating to compliance with the provisions of section 13 regarding supporting statements. Failure to comply with the new provisions may attract a penalty of $22,000 and or 3 months imprisonment. New trust account requirements for retention monies. Section 12A of the Act, the regulations may make provisions for or with respect to requiring retention monies to be held in trust for the subcontractor entitled to the money and requiring the head contractor who holds retention money to pay the money into a trust account, a retention money trust account established and operated in accordance with the regulations. This may secure retention monies when a builder is wound up. The regulations may provide for the trust account into which the retention money is to be paid to be a trust account established with a financial institution by a head contractor or a trust account established and operated by the Small Business Commissioner. Interestingly, the government has made very little mention of the retention money trust scheme, which it put forward in its consultation paper in October 2013. Over previous months, the government has consulted industry participants for its view on this trust scheme, which is proposed to be administered by the Office of Small Business Commissioner. It appears some government announcement that reform is still some way off. So this is not come into effect yet, and will only come into effect when regulations are made. And from the information we get, as we say, that this seems some time off at the moment. Do the amendments apply to the residential sector? If you are a residential builder and contract directly with a consumer that lives or intends to live in the premises where the work is to be conducted, then the Act does not currently apply to you. And that's where we previously referred to residential, exempt residential building contract. So that is classified as an exempt residential building contract under the new definition, and that's the old Section 7 definition in the Act. So if an owner resides in the property for which you're carrying out work and you contract with him directly, then it doesn't apply. As we state, it does not apply to these contracts nor to subcontracting arrangements the builder may enter into for the works on those premises. The important part, and we've stated earlier on, the commencement date. The new laws will commence on the 21st of April 2014 and will apply to all contracts entered into after 21 April 2014. Accordingly, if your contract was entered into before 21 April, you should still comply with the provisions of the old Act. Now, an industry advisory group has been set up. This has been established to advise on certain material on enforcement policy as well as guidance material on the new law. And you may still take up issues with this group if you have any issues to raise. Review of the Act. As part of its response to the Collins Inquiry recommendations, the government announced that there would be a comprehensive review of the legislation in 2015, and I think the focus on this will be more in the residential sector, but we'll have to wait and see what comes of that. The review will consider a number of recommendations by the inquiry for which the government indicated in principle support, as well as the views of stakeholders and the operation of new laws. So are there any questions? We can deal with them as early announced by Oliver. Could you just, if you have any questions, you just type them in, and then we'll read the questions out so that you can all see.
Okay, the first question is, do these amendments apply to construction project contracts only? Is there any relevance to electricians who do and charge service?
A do and charge service is a construction contract under the legislation, so they would apply there. It's anything that's involving construction works or related goods and services. So any electrical work would be related goods and services.
Does the one invoice per month requirement include variation work to the contract?
Yes, it does. The payment claim must include all invoices. That's including for original contract works and for variation works. You just claim one amount under the legislation, under the claim each month. So all invoices should be included in your, all variation invoices should be included in your invoice every month.
Is the new legislation dated 21 April up on Ostler yet?
Not that we're aware of. It should be up, I suppose, once the legislation comes into effect. You can download copies of the bill but that you'll be reading in isolation without looking at the Act, with the amendments applicable, and it may be more difficult to follow.
We have one other question. It's an extension of the previous question, which I didn't read in full. Do the amendments apply to construction project contracts only? Is there any relevance to electricians who do and charge service work on existing buildings and their BMSs?
No, it would apply there. The definition is quite wide, and it talks about related goods and services. For example, even an architect may claim under the Act for drawings that he prepares in respect of a construction contract. So if you look at Section 7 of the legislation, it deals with the application and exclusions of the Act as Section 7, and Section 5 deals with definition of construction works. It includes, in terms of electricity, it includes installation in building structure works or fittings forming part of land, including heating, lighting, air conditioning, ventilation, power supply, drainage, sanitation, water supply, fire protection, security and communication systems. It even involves external and internal cleaning of buildings, so it's a pretty wide definition, including alteration, repair, restoration, maintenance or extension.
What if the customer or head contractor asks for multiple invoices for each job worked on in a month, i.e. multiple invoices for service work done on various sites?
Well, the Act applies to you issue one payment claim per construction contract. So you may view those as a separate construction contract. Each contract for each different site is a separate contract. So then you may issue multiple invoices or claims. But if you treat it all as one contract, that would invalidate the claims. It doesn't say you can still issue the invoices that he must pay you, but you won't be able to go under the legislation. So you'd have to treat those as separate contracts to invoke the provisions of the Act.
Does the payment claim have to be dated on the last day of the month?
No, the payment claim does not have to be dated on the last day of the month, but if there's no provision in the contract as to the reference date, then the last day of the month is the reference date on and from which you may serve a payment claim. So therefore, you can serve a payment claim on, for example, the 2nd of May for a 31st of May claim. Sorry, the 2nd of May for an April claim. You don't have to serve it on the last day exactly. You can serve it later, and you can even date it on those dates. But don't predate it prior to the last day of the month. That will cause certain problems.
Is the claiming month a calendar month, or can months overlap?
The claiming month is a calendar month. Well, that's your reference date, comes from the calendar month. It's the last day of each month. And it also depends on what your contract states. A reference date does not have to be the last date of the month if the contract provides. Otherwise, you could have a reference date every 14 days or every 30 days on a contract, and those would run from the anniversary of that day on the next month.
Has the process of making a claim on the head contractor for not paying been streamlined?
Well, what has happened is that the process for claiming a head from a head contractor, it has been limited. From what I mean limited is that it's now got a maximum period. They can't, after 15 days, or 30 days, if you're claiming on a head contractor, they're not allowed to have payment terms on a contract that exceed 30 business days. However, from that point of view, that's been limited. So that's a maximum payment term that's allowed under the legislation. What is in the prior legislation, existing legislation, and it might not be relevant to what you're asking, but just there are provisions where, as a subcontractor, you can serve claims on the principal if the builder hasn't paid you, and freeze money in their hands. But that's under the old legislation, which still applies now.
What if the contract doesn't specify a date, but the builder has requested all invoices on a particular date?
Well, in that event, you could say that's an implied term of the contract, and if that is the case, what you should do is you should document that. You should send him an email or letter confirming him that it's agreed term of the contract, that payments, invoices get submitted on those days, and that becomes your reference date.
If you have multiple contracts with a builder, do they need to have multiple trust accounts, i.e. one for each project, or can the builder combine them into one trust account?
Well, as far as the trust account legislation, that has not come through yet, so we don't know what they are going to provide for in the future. However, strictly speaking, the builder should retain the money in separate trust accounts for each project, but that's not always observed. But we'll have to wait and see what the new legislation provides in respect of trust accounts.
Do you have some more info on how cash retention will be held? The info to date has been vague and sounds difficult to administer by head contractors.
I'm not that clear on the question. From retention monies under the legislation, under the new legislation. As far as I understand it, a trust fund would be set up, and then the money is paid into that trust fund and held in that trust fund, and then obviously withdrawn or paid out in the normal course, or the builder would then have to make a claim to those trust monies if they had defects or wanted to exercise any rights under the contract to claim those monies.
If there is a payment breach by the head contractor, what is the process should a subcontractor wish to report the breach?
The requirements there are for that the head contractor must serve a supporting statement when he claims from the principal, and obviously if he breaches that and he makes a false statement, that can be reported to the authorities, where he says he's paid subcontractors and he hasn't. If he complies with that, the only other way is then to proceed, if you proceed down the adjudication path under security of payments legislation, and you serve a withholding request on the principal to withhold the monies that are due and payable to the head contractor.
As a subby, is the payment term still 6 weeks from the date of invoice?
Well, the current payment terms are 10 business days from date of invoice if it's served under the Act, and obviously and that'll continue for old contracts. For new contracts that have been changed now to 30 business days.
This next question is a good one. Nice one, Warren. For ongoing due and charge work that continues past the 21st, do the new amendments apply or not?
That is a curveball. Well, in effect, your contract would be established at the original contract when it was entered into the initial due and charge, and it would just continue on the basis of that original contract, unless you somehow, depending on what suited you, whether you terminated that contract and got them to enter into a new due and charge, that may be, that's something that you may consider to get the advantage of the new legislation. However, if you go under the old legislation, you've still got a default provision of 10 business days payment, where if you go under the new legislation, you've got 30 business days, so that might not suit you, depending on what your arrangement is.
Will it be like a residential tenancy bond being lodged to the Department of Fair Trading?
We have not yet seen the regulations which they intend to promulgate, so we can't really comment at this stage as to the procedure of what they would, what they intend to legislate. The one aspect is, though, they may not want to create a difficult and cumbersome sort of process which they have to administer, and that may be a consideration when the new legislation comes out.
Is the subcontractor protected by law for any retaliation by a head contractor should a late payment be reported to the authorities?
Well, in terms of that, should the principal or head contractor kick you off the project or terminate the contract, then you'd have rights under the contract should they have breached the contract, and that would be your remedy. Further, under the security of payments legislation, if you've issued a payment claim and they don't put in a payment schedule, you may suspend works, and you may legally suspend works, and the head contractor cannot take any steps against you while you suspend those works or claim damages against you. And further, if they take the works out of your hands, if you've suspended them under the security of payments legislation, you can actually claim for those costs under the legislation.
If we allow our customers extended payment terms of 45 days, do we lose our rights under the Act?
You cannot contract out of the Act. Section 34 of the Act provides no contracting out of the Act, so that would really be an invalid contract. But if you're talking 45 days, you may be talking 45 calendar days. Excuse me. So therefore, you might come pretty close to 30 business days. You'd have to work it out.
Just to clarify, if the contract specifies 30 business days, but the contractor of their own free will offers them 45 business days, does that negate their rights under the Act?
No, they would not negate your rights under the Act.
Should we include the magic words on invoices for works done outside of New South Wales?
For works done outside New South Wales, each state has its own security of payments legislation. So for works done outside New South Wales, you should include that legislation or that relevant state's legislation on your invoices. In some cases, the works done outside New South Wales may form part of your New South Wales contract. The anchor to which the security of payments legislation is where the main contract was provided. For example, if you're providing related services over the border, then there might be transport costs or certain costs that are similar to that which you actually incur outside New South Wales. Those could be included. But if you're actually doing construction work, then you'd have to go to that state and use their legislation.
As a contractor, not being paid by a head contractor should normally start a legal process. Head contractors often don't care and tell us to start legal proceedings knowing it will take 6 months or more. My previous question about streamlining relates to the legal process timeframes.
Well, the security of payments legislation does streamline the whole process. Normally, if you go to litigation, that could take anything from 1 year to 2 years to finalize in court, with a whole raft of big legal costs involved. Under the security of payments legislation, in effect, if the other side put a payment schedule on, they've got 10 business days to put a payment schedule on. You've got then 10 business days after that to go to adjudication. An adjudicator is normally appointed 3 or 4 business days after an adjudication application is submitted, and he has 10 business days to make a determination. So in effect, that whole process could take just over 30 business days from start to finish until you get a determination, and then the other side has 5 business days to pay the amount of the determination. So that shows you the streamlining if you go under the Act.
Is there a standard format for the subcontractor statement? Do we use the existing one, the subcontractor declaration form? Also, please clarify again who has to attach this to the payment claim.
Well, currently you'd use the standard subcontractor's declaration form, and that's normally a contractual issue. The subcontractor does not have to provide a declaration to the head contractor unless the contract provides that. And sorry, so I missed the second part of the question there, Ollie.
Who has to submit a subcontractor declaration?
Well, under the legislation, just the head contractor has to submit it to the principal. However, many contracts provide if you're a subcontractor, you have to submit a subcontractor's declaration if you have subbies below you, and that's more of a contractual requirement than a legislative requirement.
To conform to the new Act, all we have to do is remove the Payment Act wording for contracts starting from 21/4/2014.
Well, that is correct, but it does not invalidate the claim if you still use that wording. It doesn't say that if you use the wording, it invalidates the claim. So if you wanted to, you could just continue in your old systems and just run them as they are until the new situation is phased out. It's up to you how you want to run it, but that's all that's required. Is that it's an extra it reduces the restrictions of having to include the words. So that way it saves the administration, etc. But it may be worthwhile still including those words on your claim.
They still have to particularize their claim.
Yeah. The requirements of the payment claim require that there must be a claimed amount, and there must be a description of the contract works. If there's no description, then it's an invalid payment claim.
Does the legislation apply in the ACT?
The ACT have their own legislation. It's similar to the New South Wales legislation. Not identical, but there are similar provisions. But these amendments do not apply to the ACT. They only apply to New South Wales. That's the only state that it applies to.
Going back to the timeframes you mentioned for the adjudication process, what is the next step after the builder has been instructed to pay the subcontractor and still refuses to?
Once adjudication determination has been issued or awarded, the builder has 5 business days to pay you from service of that determination on the builder. The next step is obtaining an adjudication certificate from the nominating authority. Thereafter, you can immediately go to court, and that's a very quick process. That takes a day or less than a day, depending on how you do it. And obviously, they have to post the original to you to get the original, so that might take a day's posting. And then you can immediately go to court. You can enter judgment against the builder, and if you've got his banking details, you can issue a garnishee order against his bank without him knowing about it. So it's quite a quick remedy. That can happen in a matter of a day or two. There's no further questions. So I'd just like to thank you for all attending today, and please don't hesitate to contact us if you've got any queries or need any assistance with anything. Thank you.